I'm Jim Knight, co-founder of the Instructional Coaching Group, and you're listening to Coaching Conversations, where I talk with coaching experts from around the world so that all of us can learn better ways to make an unmistakably positive impact on the people around us.
Well, hi, everyone, and welcome to the Coaching Questions Show on the Coaching Conversations podcast with Jim Knight. This show is for everyone that calls the Instructional Coaching Group home for all your instructional coaching content. These episodes are designed for anyone who desires to learn and think alongside Jim and myself as you continue to make an impact in all the great things that you do. I'm Jessica Weiss, a proud member of our ICG consultant team. Today's episode is about Jim's doctoral research, and I can't wait to take a journey through how it all started and where you are today with it, Jim. Once our Q&A has come to a close, we'll have an epilogue or a final note at the end of the show with a question or two to wrap up our discussion before we sign off. So on with the show. You were going to say something, Jim. What was it?
Well, I'm excited to talk about my dissertation. It's been a while, but it still feels in a way like it was only yesterday. So it's pretty exciting.
It definitely leaves its mark on you.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm wearing a shirt to celebrate the
the partnership principles. Very good. That's good.
Yes, just for you today, Jim.
If you're not watching on YouTube, you better just shut down Spotify and go right to YouTube News.
That's right. And then go to our merch store and get your own.
That's right.
Well, Jim, I have a fun fact for you.
It's a lovely Christmas gift for children to walk around with the partnership principles on their bodies.
That's a great idea. I should put it in the kids' stocking. I like that. Are you ready for a fun fact?
Yes.
Okay, I think it's fun. I don't know if you'll think it's fun. It's Friday the 13th.
I know.
Yeah, and it's, I think, the third Friday the 13th of the year.
Wow.
Yes, this comes from my 9-year-old who studied Friday the 13th via her Alexa.
Well, I'll say this about Friday the 13th. It was Friday the 13th when COVID kind of really landed.
It's true.
And I was doing this workshop, and it was like 200 people. And then like 20 would leave because their school district would call and say, you have to come in. So throughout the whole day, Friday the 13th, people were leaving. And then to celebrate, I have this little video clip, which I don't use anymore for obvious reasons. But the video was about spreading positivity.
Oh, no.
And so it showed a little clip. And I love the little video clip because it's that idea of what I call a healthy virus, which is another phrase I don't use anymore. But I showed this clip, and what happens is somebody gets an idea and their body starts to glow, and then they share it with somebody else and their body starts to glow, and the people are on the bus and they're all getting this positive. It starts with the idea and they're all sharing the same idea. And you can see that by the end of it, all these kids are like glowing little bugs. And I showed the clip, and then afterwards I said, maybe that wasn't the right clip to show. Didn't really land in my head. So,
well, I wonder if we're at a point now where we could watch that clip again.
I don't think so.
No, it's just a no.
I wouldn't show it. No, because think of the heartbreak people have dealt with. I don't want to stir that up. So
yeah. Okay, another fun fact for you is, recently I went to Boston, and I had to write it down because I was afraid I'd forget. I got to see the Boston Bruins Bobby Orr statue.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah, and I knew you didn't know exactly what that meant.
The greatest defenseman of all time, unquestionably. Anybody can challenge me, but to my mind, he was like the Wayne Gretzky of defensemen because he revolutionized the game. He became an offensive. I think he won the scoring title at least once or twice as a defenseman, which is amazing. So he was great.
Yeah, it's a cool.
Still alive and well.
Yeah, wonderful. Okay, and then I have a final thing for you. It's actually a question. Who were some of your top artists on your Spotify Wrapped?
Well, I had 5, of course. So it was Beethoven and Bach and Max Richter and Beethoven, Bach, Max Richter, Handel, and Taylor Swift.
I didn't want to interrupt you, but I wanted to say, can I guess one? And it was going to be Taylor Swift.
It's pretty funny. Really funny. So we have these 4. Well, Max Richter is kind of a new classical composer, and the thing is, it's the music I listen to when I write. And so that's But now I'm like, okay, I have to have 2 different things. So this is like privilege in action, but I've got 2 different music things. So Spotify is is that's the music I listen to for fun.
Mm.
And then the other one I use is for music for working. So one's going to have all Bach and Beethoven, and the other one's going to have, I don't know. Right now, Fleetwood Mac's doing pretty well.
Okay. Wonderful. Thanks. I was just curious because last year we talked about our Spotify Wrapped. So I just had to know about your Spotify
Well,
Wrapped.
what about yours? What's your top 5?
I don't remember all 5, but Imagine Dragons was actually my number 1 this year.
Ooh.
Yes.
Well, they're nice.
Followed closely by Eminem, but Imagine Dragons, yeah, they made it to the top.
I've been heavily into Yola Tango recently. They're great.
Okay.
They're a little too old for you, but they're young for me. So.
Oh, I'm going to take that as a compliment. Thank you, Jim.
Yes.
Okay, well, today, Jim, we're talking about the partnership principles, hence my t-shirt for those of you watching on YouTube. So I wondered if you could start by sharing how they came to be and maybe even a little bit about them if you'd like.
Yes, it's going to be hard to keep this short, but I worked in a community college. I worked with students who had learning disabilities, and I thought I was going to teach Shakespeare or the modern novel, but I ended up passionately loving working with students who'd never really had much success with writing, and it had nothing to do with me and had to do with the research I learned. I was in Toronto, but I learned this research from Dee LaFrance, who is now Dee Gold. Well, she was Dee Gold, and now she's Dee LaFrance. And Dee had gone to the University of Kansas, and she'd learned these learning strategies. And so she was my coach. We didn't use the term coach, but she came in the classroom, showed me how to do things, walked me through the materials. And that course won an award. I got a full-time job. But more importantly, none of the students in the course dropped out. It's a community college. They could all drop out. All 10 of them were at risk for failure. They all stayed. They even wrote a letter to the president to save the course. And it wasn't me. It was that they were succeeding. They could see themselves succeeding. Because I had other courses. And I actually did a little paper on this. I don't know if I could find it now, but a research paper where the students in the class with the strategies were compared with other students I taught writing to. And the one where I used the strategy, their growth was off the charts, just amazing in terms of what they did. One person said to me, every year, and they're older. So some of them were, it was from probably 19 to 55. And one student said that my sister-in-law has always criticized my grammar and my inability to write. And she said, now that I learned the strategy, I understand how to write. And so I wrote her, and when I used to send her a card over the holidays, I would just sign my name because I didn't want her to make fun of my writing. Well, this time she said I wrote several long sentences. And then when I looked at her card, I could see grammatical errors in what she said. And I pointed them out to her. Writing is so cool because you can show progress, especially if you have tight kind of assessments. So we had these really tight rubrics of what it should look like. And I could sit down with the students and say, this is where you are, this is where, and they didn't believe they could write, but when they watched themselves change, they went from learned helplessness to learned optimism without question. So I saw it, and like anybody else who works with kids who are at risk or people who are at risk, I wanted to spread the word. I wanted to let other people know what I was doing. So I went to Kansas, became a trainer. I read all these research articles, read all these books, and went through a really pretty rigorous process to be a certified strategic instruction model trainer. Came back to Canada and failed miserably. So I would do workshops, and people liked the strategy, but I would follow up, and nobody did any. I handed out all these postcards, hundreds of postcards. I had to lick the stamps. We used to have to lick the stamps. And so I had all these postcards, and I said, when you implement this, I want you to send me a postcard. Tell me about how great it was. And after 2 years, I didn't get one postcard. And my vision was I wanted my whole wall filled with postcards of successes, but nothing. So I became obsessed with, if we got these things at work, how do we get them in the hands of teachers? So I was in Toronto. Michael Fullan was at the University of Toronto. So Michael introduced me to a whole host of people like Peter Senge, Thomas Sergiovanni, Margaret Wheatley, Peter Block in particular. And then I read everything that Michael had written about change up to that point. He was writing a book called Change Forces. And then I did an independent study with him. He was my next coach. And so then when I came to Kansas, I wanted to take everything I learned from Michael about change so that we could address this issue of getting things implemented. And so that's how it all started. It started with that. And then I read really widely, sorry, this is so long, but I read really widely in all kinds of fields, everything from philosophy of science to organizational development and organizational behavior to leadership to, I guess, what you might call cultural anthropology or kind of feminist work. So people like Riane Eisler, Peter Block, Richard Bernstein, who talked about philosophy of science and how ideas are shared. Peter Block's stewardship was really, really important. And even I went back to books I read earlier, like Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and I looked at all these things. And I was also reflecting on my own presentations, how they weren't working because I was telling people, you have to do it this way because research has been done. And then as I read all those things, I synthesized all those ideas into the 7 partnership principles. That's how it came to be. You could do it all now today with like 2 seconds on ChatGPT, but back then we actually had to read the books and know what was there. So
Read the books and synthesize all the information. You did an entire literature review on a lot of different topics: change, culture, leadership, so many. So I wondered though, Jim, could you give us an overview of the 7 success factors?
So the core thing I would say is to treat professionals like the professionals they really are. So I interact with another person as an equal. If you think of 2 architects getting together to talk about architecture, one's not going to show up and say, here's what you have to do. They're going to work together. And you think about the concept of partners. Partners don't make decisions for each other. And so the big idea is about sitting down with another person and communicating. And you think they have valuable things to say. And you're not God's gift to teachers and you're here to fix them. But that I recognize you as another, even if you're only in your 20s and you're just starting to teach, I still see you as a professional, which means I want you to be thinking with me and I don't want to do the thinking for you. And then the principles are 7 different things: equality, choice, voice, dialogue, reflection, praxis, reciprocity. And each one of those has behaviors associated with it. But I would maybe like to talk about equality first, because sometimes people get hung up on ideas about equality. Equality is not saying we treat everybody the same. Equality is saying that one person does not have more value than the other. Nelson Mandela is quoted often as saying, I'm not 100% sure he said this, but it's still a great quote. It has more credibility coming from him. But he said the problems, he or someone like him said, the problems of the world begin with the idea that one group is more important than another. And the equality principle is not that. And it's to say each person is equally important. It's the opposite of white supremacy, that one group is better. And equality is not saying we treat people the same. I don't think you treat people the same. If you have a box of cookies and they're on a shelf and there's a 6-foot person and there's a 4-foot tall person, and only the 6-foot tall person can reach the shelf, that's not really fair. That's not freedom. Freedom is you give the 4-foot tall person a ladder or whatever it takes so they can get the cookies too. Saying you're free to get them, but you don't have a chance, that's not freedom. So equality is not saying we're going to treat the 6-foot tall person and the 4-foot tall person the same. Equality is saying those 2 people are equally important, and therefore we need to make sure the 4-foot tall person has got a ladder to get to those cookies.
Thank you, Jim. You said you wanted to start with equality, and I decided I'm going to write down really important words that I think you're saying from each of the partnership principles, if that's okay.
Right.
And one of them that I heard multiple times from equality was value. So really seeing that we all have value. And I love that. So that's my word for your equality partnership principle. Would you like to share about others?
Other principles?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I'll just say for equality first that if you really believe in equality, you shouldn't be moralistically judging another person. Moralistic judgment is when you roll your eyes when they talk, and Michael Fullan taught me there's a lot of ways to roll your eyes that don't involve your eyes. And so equality is, I don't think I'm better than that person. Therefore, I don't moralistically judge them. You discern reality. We're not going to move forward without a clear picture of reality, not very easily. It's helpful to have a clear picture of reality. But moralistic judgment is where you say something like, she sure does love to talk, or he's really full of himself, or I don't think he cares about kids, or you wouldn't believe what I saw in that classroom. I have no idea what that person's thinking. I don't think they did anything to prepare. So where you don't just interact, but you interact in a way that says, you don't just look at reality. You say they're a bad person essentially because of it. And so to really live out the principle of equality, you replace moralistic judgment with appreciation, looking for the good in other people, and we call it being a witness to the good, and then playing it back to them, not in a judgmental way, but just to say, I'm a witness to what I saw. I saw you do this thing. That was so cool. That's kind of part of equality. And I love that video we show, Dr. Angelou, where she says, be a blessing to somebody, and I think that's the opposite of which doesn't mean we can ever get perfect at these things. One of the things about the principles is that you're going to have good days and bad days. Some days you're really good at honoring the voice of other person. Other days, this is not my day. I'm not going to be able to do it. So you just do the best you can. The next conversation's another chance. And it's hard. I don't know why, but it's hard not to judge sometimes in a moralistic. And maybe some things do have to be moralistically judged too. Let's not ignore that. So the second principle is choice. The key thing I'd say about choice is, like it or not, people only do what they choose to do. So you can't enjoy that. You can't ignore that fact. And so I would say coaching and professional development is about creating the conditions for people to make choices to help them grow in ways that have a powerful, positive impact on kids. And one way that it doesn't work is telling people what to do. So creating the condition, because I think, I remember when I interviewed Dan Pink, he said, and he's arguably one of the world's best experts on motivation. Drive is one of the best books. And he said, I don't know many people more motivated than teachers. He said, August, they're in Office Depot buying all kinds of stuff with their own money. They don't get paid much. They're dedicated to figuring out what his mother was a teacher. He talks about how motivated teachers are. So I think when you create the conditions for teachers to get the kind of support that they really want, that sees them as a professional, because they are, then good things can happen. So choice is, first off, recognizing nothing happens without a choice. Often choice is destructive, but choice also doesn't mean you can just do whatever you want. You can't say, I think I'm going to keep a little bottle of whiskey in my desk. After a couple of hits, I'm a better teacher. I don't think that's going to work. You're not going to be able to do that. That's not a choice. Or any number of different things you can't choose in a system. And you can't choose not to learn if you want to be a professional. But regardless of that, when you have choice, you're more likely to embrace what every parent of toddlers knows. If you tell the child what to do, it's going to be a little difficult. But if you say, okay, you've got 3 choices, and you give them 3 choices, they're way more likely to embrace it.
That's great. Something that you said that really stood out to me in that conversation is the conditions that need to be in place. And this is something I was even thinking about before we started our podcast today, is what are the conditions so that people can live out the partnership principles? And when you were just talking about choice, it made me think of one thing we hear oftentimes in the virtual workshop or other workshops, Intro to Leadership Coaching, Managing Challenging Conversations, is we hear, well, how do I deal with a situation where this person needs to do this, but they're just not? And perhaps the right conditions aren't in place for them to make the choice that they need to make, or that's right for them or right for their students. So you've really got me thinking about conditions right here when we talk about choice. What do you think about that?
Well, who says they have to do it? I think that would be the first thing, because we all naturally think our ideas are the best. And so we really love to tell teachers, I've watched 40 minutes of your class. I know exactly what you need to do. And the teacher's been there all year. And, as Michael Bungay Stanier put it in the Advice Trap, which is, I think, should be compulsory reading for leaders and coaches, we think our advice is way more valuable than it is, and we think other people want it way more than they do. But at the same time, we talk about dialogue, and a dialogue doesn't, you don't sit there like a rock and not share your ideas. You just don't attach yourself to the idea. So and you don't tell people information they don't need. So you start from a place of, I love Michael Bungay Stanier's question. You've probably thought a lot about this. What do you think you might do? That opens the door. They might well say something better than you could think of. And if nothing else, there's a really good chance to say what you're going to say. And by starting with respecting the intelligence of the other person and honoring choice, and then when I share ideas, I say, if I'm a coach, I say, do you mind if I share some thoughts? I'd love to hear what you think. But I want to create the conditions with choice where the person feels they can tell me what they think. They don't have to pretend they're going to do it and then go back and do their own thing. I want them to feel really safe saying, I don't really have time to do that check for understanding thing, or I don't really understand this, or I'd like to do it like this. What do you think about that? I want the two of us to go back and forth. And so creating the conditions for choice is about the person trusting me, not to come down on them if they say, I'm not going to do it this way. And what we've seen is usually people don't do it the way that professional development lays out. They make adaptations. So the whole impact cycle is about establishing a goal that's a standard for excellence. That's a whole different conversation, but you need to have the goal to drive the process. But choice is that I recognize people only do what they choose to do. And I want this person to feel safe telling me what they're thinking. And then when I share my ideas, I'm not trying to talk them into it. I'm just saying, here's one thing I'm wondering. And I think we have a natural proclivity to want to push our ideas, even though they might, like I've told you this before, but right there's a poster on the wall of Iron Man. Jenny did the Iron Man, my wife. And a little while ago, she sort of got out of exercising. And a little while ago, she was thinking about getting back into running. And I gave her all kinds of advice on running. And first off, I haven't gone running in forever. I can't run right now because I weigh too much. I walk is what I'm trying to do just to get down to where I can run. And she looked at me and she said, I did do an Ironman. I know a few things about how to do this, but I wanted to give her advice. So I think, but choice it's a little bit of a challenge, but it's the heart of the matter is people only do what they choose to do. So I want this person to feel safe telling me, this is what I think I'm going to do. This is how I think I'm going to do it. That's choice.
That's great. And I love that you have Jenny's Iron Man poster back there. That's a cool piece of your background. I love that.
Well, she put it there. So
well, she did a great job designing your office. So Jimmy talked about conditions for choice and how teachers, if they feel safe, they will share what they're thinking. And then as the coach, you would even ask questions like Michael's. You've probably thought a lot about this, or sharing ideas provisionally, of course, and then inviting the teacher to share what they think. All of those really facilitate another partnership principle of voice. Would you like to say a few things about that?
Yeah, the thing I'd say about voice is just to recognize that the other person's voice is as important as yours. And that when you interact with that person, you should communicate that you believe they have valuable things to say. I love this line I heard from a coaching expert, and unfortunately I can't remember her name, but from the United Kingdom. And she said, good questions don't make the other person wrong. And so the questions you ask and the way you listen, they should communicate that I really want to hear what you have to say. I really value. This isn't just a little trick. I'm genuinely interested. And not only am I interested, I know you have valuable things. And you watch Claudia Owad in our CAP program, the coaching accreditation program. You watch her coach. She communicates in her body language and the way she pauses as she asks questions and the way she makes eye contact and the things she said. She communicates that no matter who it is she's coaching, I know you have good ideas in there and I want to hear them. I really believe. And so that to me is voice and I think if a person doesn't feel heard, they're right. We haven't done our job. It's on us to create those conditions. One of my favorite things from the TLC we just did in New Orleans was when Kate Murphy talked about a support response and a shift response. And a support response is, let's say someone has a child and they just had a diagnosis of high-functioning autistic or something. Support response would be, gosh, I can see how that would be. That must be a lot of worry for you. Or how are you feeling about that? And a shift response would be, oh, I had the same assessment with my son last year, and let me tell you what I went through, and you turn the conversation to you. So I think looking at little things like that, when's it appropriate? Sometimes it is appropriate to do a shift response, but when's it appropriate to provide the support response? Probably more often than not, to honor the voice of the person so people feel like their voice is heard. And Russ Qualia's work would say that's critical for kids too. When kids have a voice, they're way more likely to be engaged, like 5 times more likely, according to Russ.
Hey, the word I'm writing down for voice is curiosity. And I think that what I heard as you were talking is, and what Claudia does also as she coaches, and many other people that I've seen coach, you are one of them, is to be genuinely interested, genuinely curious. And Kate Murphy says this in her book too, because without curiosity, it can come across as fake, or it can come across as, well, I'm just asking you a question to ask you a question, but I have some ideas of my own. I'm just doing this thing. So to really make sure people's voices are heard is to approach things with curiosity. What do you think about that word?
Well, I would add something to that. I think curiosity is definitely what you do as a coach. You want to be curious and open, but is it curiosity for my sake or for the teacher's sake?
Mm-hmm.
I love Christian Van Nuremberg's mantra as a coach. He says, it's not about me. And so if somebody says to me, well, I went to this conference and it was all about design thinking. And it was right actually in San Francisco where they do a lot of the design, outside there. If I was to say, oh, tell me about the conference, I'd love to hear about that. I'm really interested. I'd be curious, but it's a curiosity that satisfies me. So it has to be a curiosity. If you're coaching, the coaching conversation, another thing Claudia says is, this is your time. And it has to be their time, not my time. So that's the only thing I would add to curiosity is I want to be curious in a way that helps the other person think more clearly.
Right. Not inquisitive in a way that interrupts what you're saying because something in my head needs to be satisfied. Right. So yeah.
Maybe after the coaching, I can say, hey, tell me all about that.
Oh, and yeah. So you've talked about equality, choice, and voice. Are there any other partnership principles you'd like to share with us?
Well, I think dialogue is really key. I think in many ways, when we talk about coaching, we talk about dialogical coaching. And dialogue is the idea that we're thinking together. It's the etymology of the word, according to Bohm, is dialogos. Logos is meaning, dia is movement. It's moving back and forth. In a real dialogue, you lose track of where you are. And a lot of people have written about dialogue. William Isaac's book I like a lot. Bohm's book on dialogue I like a lot. Peter Senge got me interested in the fifth discipline. But the book I love is Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed, which I don't necessarily recommend for anybody. You may not agree with some ideas in it, and it's not an easy read. But he talks about 3 things as crucial conditions for dialogue. And he said one of them is an openness to hearing the other person's opinion. He calls that humility. So if I'm not interested in what you have to say, we're not going to have a back and forth conversation because there's no coming to me. It's all me going to you. So that humility, the courage to be willing to change your opinion, that's the humility. Second thing is faith. And we've talked about Claudia. What she does beautifully as a coach is she communicates that she believes in the other person. And her way of questioning the questions she asks, it's always communicating, I know you can do this, and I want to hear how you're going to think it through. So she helps people think more deeply, and she doesn't do the thinking for them. But the big thing is she communicates, I believe in you. And then Freire's third word is love. And that might not be a word that people are at peace with. It would be nice to think that love is a place for in schools, but you could call it benevolence, or I have your best interests at heart. And what Freire says is when you have those 3 things, humility, faith, and love, he says trust will follow. And then when you have trust, you can have a dialogue, a reflective conversation that involves hope and moving forward. But without any one of those 3 things, the dialogue's not possible. If I'm not interested in your opinion, if I don't actually think you can do it, if I'm actually more interested in me than you, you're not going to have trust. And then the other principles are reflection. This is a thinking conversation. And praxis, it's a thinking conversation grounded in real life. And the reciprocity, which means I go into the conversation expecting to learn from you. The smartest people in the world, according to Brad Stats in a book called Never Stop Learning, are ones who think they can learn from. When they meet a person, they say, there's something I can learn from this person. And that's the idea of reciprocity, that I think that I can learn from them. But they're all bundled in this whole idea of I'm expecting to learn from you. I have your best interests at heart. I'm really listening to you. And I would say when you put those together, you should have what I would call, and I think others have said, a mutually humanizing conversation. You walk away feeling better for the conversation. That's what should be happening.
I love that phrase, mutually humanizing conversation. In the definitive guide, when you wrote about that, I put a big cloud, a big circle around it, because that's really the goal, is for everyone to feel like they've been a part of a mutually humanizing conversation. Well, thanks for taking us through a walk through those partnership principles, Jim. So if that's what guides our conversations, when is it not a partnership conversation?
I just spent a week with Christian Van Nuremberg working on a second edition of the Leader's Guide to Coaching in Schools, and John Campbell. John was not with us, but he was on Zoom every day at 5:00. And we worked that through. There's nothing wrong with a conversation that the person has to, a telling conversation. So we kind of broke it down into partnership conversations and telling conversations. And when it's a telling conversation, especially when you're a leader, there are things people just have to do. And often it has to do with unprofessional behavior. Somebody who's bullying kids, using microaggressions in the classroom, disorganized, losing assignments, toxic force on a team. Those things can't stand. They're violating the cultural norms of the organization. The leader spends a lot of time trying to create a certain kind of culture. And so telling makes a whole lot of sense. And then the other thing is, if it's a simple situation, where you just have to explain how to do it. Somebody wants to learn how to do software. They don't want you to say to them, other times you've tried to learn software. What's work for you? They want, show me how to do the darn thing. So if it's cut and dry and crystal clear, and the person wants to hear it, just explain it. But I would say the dialogical approach can cover most of the times you share information in a better way, because you open up the opportunity for the other person to say what they're thinking, and you work it through. That principle of praxis we're grounded in real life application of the learning. So I'm not going to tell you and you have to go off and do it. We're going to work out together. How can we make things just a little bit better in tomorrow's class, focused on the goal you really want to work on? And because we have a goal, we'll be able to see if it worked or not. That's the thing. So there's nothing wrong with telling. Telling has to happen. And sometimes when it's the most efficient, it's just that using telling to address professional practice, where you're helping the person engage in professional learning, given the complexities of the classroom. In our experience, that's way more likely to lead to significant change, especially when you have a goal that drives the process.
Thanks, Jim. I look forward to reading your new writing about the partnership approach versus telling. That's exciting. I can't wait to see what you, Jim, and Christian cook up. Okay, another question for you as we continue this journey through your doctoral research and where you are today is, what new thinking do you have about these principles? Or how has your thinking shifted from where it all started to where you are today?
Yeah, and just to say, it's John Campbell's ideas as much as it's Christian's and mine. So the three of us are working on that. I would say not an enormous amount. I mean, if you look at the book Instructional Coaching, everything in the book has changed except probably the partnership. There you go. Except the partnership principles. But what I would say has changed is I realized just describing the principles isn't enough. We have to say, what does it look like when you live according to those principles? So I've created, in the definitive guide and other places, I talk about questions to reflect on your principles. So do I interrupt? Do I moralistically judge people? If I'm interrupting, I'm probably not living out the principle of equality. Can I let go of control? Is a question for choice. Did the other person know that I think their opinion matters? Do I approach people with humility and faith and love in terms of the way I interact with them? Do they know that am I really open to their opinions, and do I really believe in them? And then with the reflection, can I let go of the advice trap and not feel I have to give advice? With praxis, are we working on real life activities? With reflection, do I really think I can learn from every other person? So I think people can do kind of lip service to the principles, but those questions and reflecting on what would it really look like if I really lived this out become really important, because we work in hierarchical systems, but sometimes that hierarchy interferes with professional learning. And if we really want professionals, they need to be treated as the professionals they are.
That's great, Jim. Thank you so much. I've enjoyed listening to you share about the principles, so thank you. And we've made it to the epilogue of our show, Jim. So to close out today, I have a couple of final questions with all of your listeners in mind. So the first question is, what if people listening to this episode want to learn more about the partnership principles? What could they do?
Well, tons of things. So there are free on the Radical Learners blog or on the instructional coaching blog. There are multiple blogs about it and videos talking about the partnership principles. So if they just poke around on the blog, or if you go to the resource library, I'd imagine if you just type in partnership, all those things would pop up. There's a course on Radical Learners, the first 90 days of coaching, where I talk about the partnership principles. There's also a course on presenting from a partnership perspective. It's called Partnership Learning. So how do you embody those principles in your presentations? And so that's just radicallearners.com. And then probably the most advanced description of the principles right now is in the Definitive Guide to Instructional Coaching. And then we have a workshop called Better Together, the Partnership Approach to Change. There's lots of ways people can access the ideas.
Thank you, Jim. Okay, second question is, in the virtual institute that you and I co-lead, we often hear a question like this: should I do all 7 of these partnership principles in every single conversation? What do you say to that, Jim?
Well, no, I think, for example, like I would say in most coaching conversations, yes, but, Lindsay Deacon is a person who, we work with a lot. She's come to a lot of our workshops, and, she was in a meeting and with her school she was in a few years ago. And, someone said something that was racist, and then the meeting just kept, and then people piled on, and they were criticizing a particular group of students. And she called it out. She said, I think what you're saying sounds to me like it's racist. And then there was a big kerfuffle in the school, and they weren't happy about her saying that. But the next day, they had a meeting to discuss what had happened the previous day. Principal led the meeting, and everybody sort of piled on Lindsay. And there was a new teacher there, and he said, I'm ashamed of what I said yesterday. And because of what Lindsay said, I'm not going to do that anymore. He said, I'm changed in terms of how I see my students. I think she's right. I'm going to work with her. And I think when you hear something that's homophobic or sexist or racist, you have to do your best to speak up and say what has to be said. Now, maybe you can do it in a way that's partnershipy, but the bottom line is sometimes things have to stop. And there's the clip we often show of Meryl Streep in the classroom where she says to the student, do you want people to think you're stupid? She says to the student. Well, that kid's going to remember that word stupid for the rest of the day, for the rest of the week, maybe for the rest of his life. And so when you see that, you have to say, look, I noticed this thing, and I want to point out this thing. So there are times I think you have to step out of the partnership approach. In particular, when what's happening is bad for kids, bad for the school, bad for other people. And the thing about that thing that Lindsay did is if more people do that in the school, and they'll know when they're around Lindsay, don't say that. And if other people do that, when I'm around those people, don't say that. So if enough people speak up, then those kind of conversations go away, because around me, that doesn't stand. So I think there are times where that's appropriate.
Thank you, Jim. And another thing we talk about in the workshop or in any place where we're talking about the partnership principles is people can use the definitive guide, the partnership questions, to reflect on how they show up in conversations. So I've even used it after I record a coaching conversation or after I facilitate learning for adults. I'll look back through those partnership principles and think, how did I show up? How did I do today as a partner? And I can even use them to set goals for areas in which I'd really like to focus on next time. Do you have any thoughts on that idea before we close out?
Yeah, I love it. In fact, as you're talking, I'm thinking, I'm working on the second edition of instructional coaching. I'm going to have to include that in there. How do you reflect on this? Some kind of tool for reflection. I think that's a great idea. I think that's, but also the principle of choice is critical. So you may look at the principles and say, it doesn't work for me. You have to decide for yourself if they work for you. It'd be kind of funny if I said, you have to believe in these principles. You don't have a choice. So people have to work it out for themselves.
Right. Is there anything you'd like to add before we wrap up today?
Well, I just want to reiterate what I said at the start. I wrote the book on this, so to speak. I did my dissertation on this. I wrote about it in instructional coaching. I wrote about it in a book called Coaching Classroom Management. And then it was in the impacts, the unmistakable impact. I've probably written about the principles more than anything else. It's probably the idea that's really caught on more than anything else I've done. It's shown up in lots of other people's books and so forth. But I think it's really important to not feel you have to get it perfect. You're not going to. There's going to be days you're judgmental. There's going to be days you don't listen very well. You just having those principles helps you with the next conversation. So you can say, and that's why I like your idea of reflecting on how it went. Next time, I've written about this. I still can't do them. Well, if I can't do them, who's going to? There are times when I'm better than others, but it's pretty hard for me not to tell the person what I think they should do. I have to really, Michelle Harris says she literally bites her tongue. And there's an element of that. I'm always learning to try to get better at this, but I don't think you should beat yourself up if you're not perfect at these. Just try, and then there's always another conversation to try again.
That's right. Thanks for that final thought, Jim. And thank you for everything you've shared today. Well, thank you for listening today, everyone. If you found today's episode helpful, it would help us if you liked or followed the podcast. You can also leave us a rating or a comment so we can continue to create meaningful content just for you. Thank you. And until next time, go forth and lead great coaching conversations. Thanks so much, Jim.
Hey, thank you, Jessica.